So, for those of you that didn't hear that, my name is Jeremy. I'm one of the pastors here. Let me ask you a question. How did you get here today? How did you get, not the vehicle, not where you came from. How did you get here? How did you get inside a church building? How did you get here today? Now, for me, how did I get into church? Well, I grew up in church, but when I was 18, I decided I was the smartest person that ever lived and didn't need God. And so for about 2 years, I made 9 of the 10 dumbest decisions I've ever made. And so when I was about 20, I met this girl, and she was awesome. And she was like, hey, I think you should come to church with me. And so how did I get here? How did I get into church? It was because of my wife, Kim. How did Kim get to church? Yeah, everybody loves Kim. For those of you that haven't met her yet, you'll soon learn that you'll like her better than me, and that's just a reality I've learned to live with. But how did my wife, Kim, get to church? If you go back far enough, you'll find out that in middle school, a friend invited her to the youth group or whatever, and she got to church because some person I've never met, some mom, carpooled a bunch of middle school girls to church. How did you get to church? See, the thing is, if you go back far enough, every one of us has somebody that first extended an invitation. And even if you're like, well, I grew up in church. How did your parents get to church? See, we know that far enough back, somebody gave an invitation. We're starting a brand new series today called Neighbor. Now, I'm hoping for those of you that have been around church for a while, the verse I'm about to read is kind of like, oh yeah. Like I'm not expecting to get ready to read this verse and you'd be like, I've never heard that before. But just for the sake of saying it out loud, let's take a look at what Jesus said was super important. In the book of Matthew, chapter 22, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now listen to this. All of the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commands. Jesus was telling his audience, if you get nothing else right, love God and love your neighbors, and you've gotten it all right. We've heard that. We know that. This is not new information for most of us. This is not something that you're like, oh man, Jeremy, you're blowing me away with these new revelations. No. This is stuff that we have heard, and yet at the same time, it seems to be really, really hard. It seems to be difficult. It seems to be something that we're like, yeah, the world needs more of that. I mean, no one's going to walk out of these doors and be like, hey, we need less love. We need less neighboring. We need less stuff like that. No, we all desperately know it's needed, and yet for some reason, it's hard. And yet for some reason, it's difficult. And so what I want to do today is I want to go back to the original invitation story. All of us owe our presence here to the story we're about to read. And the story that we're going to look at is going to explain why it's so hard. And my hope is that after our time together this morning, when we walk out these doors, we're a little bit better equipped to know why neighboring is hard, but also a little bit better equipped to know, well, what can we do about it? So if you've got a Bible, we're going to spend most of our time in Acts chapter 10. Acts chapter 10 is one of the most important chapters in the entire Bible because, like I said, all of us owe our presence here today to what happens in this story. So once again, Acts chapter 10, starting at verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to all those in need, and he prayed to God regularly. One day about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner whose house is by the sea. All right, let me give you a little bit of context to know where we're at in this story. So this story takes place about 8 to 10 years after Jesus had died, was resurrected, and returned to heaven. And so for the last 8 to 10 years, the church has been growing. The church has been spreading. About 5 years before this story, there was a big persecution that broke out. And so a lot of people fled the city of Jerusalem and went all over and started worshiping God there. Peter was amongst that group. He's now in a seaside village called Joppa. And so we're about 10 years into the growth of the church when this story takes place. That'll be important in a second. We're going to keep reading. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up to the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being led down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of this vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? Has your wife or your husband ever told you something 3 times in a row?" Okay, yeah, okay. You know this. You know that if you get told anything, or your boss or whatever, if anybody tells you something 3 times in a row, it's not a suggestion. "Hey, honey, will you take out the trash?" "Yeah, sure, I'll get to it." "Jeremy, you can take out that trash?" "Jeremy, take out the trash." Okay, by the time the 3rd time rolls around, I know it's serious. I know that whoever's speaking to me means business. God is trying to very clearly impress upon Peter, what I am telling you is not like a passing little thought. You need to internalize this. That's why it talks about several times, Peter's dwelling on it. He's thinking about it. So that when these guys show up for him, Peter knows this is serious. Pay attention to it. We're going to keep reading. The next day, Peter started out with them, and some of the believers from Joppa went along. The following day, he arrived in Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter entered the house, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet in reverence. But Peter made him get up. "Stand up," he said. I'm only a man myself." While talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. He said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without raising any objection. May I ask, why have you sent for me?" All right, let's color in these lines here. Peter's not actually being all that polite right now. Like, imagine I came to you and said, "Hey, historically, my people have always thought of your people as dirty, unclean, and not worth associating with. But God has told me that I'm supposed to be here today, so I came. What do you want?" Like, Peter is not being very polite at all, okay? Like, there's no way to read these verses and think that Peter's doing anything but the bare minimum. Like, look, I had this vision. God sent it to me 3 times. I've kind of seen God do some crazy things in my life, so I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to show up. So I'm here. Now, 2 days ago, I thought you and your people were trash, but God told me not to call you trash, so I'm not calling you trash, but I'm here. What do you want? Okay, this is the basis of this conversation so far. It's not off to an amazing start, okay? All right, let's see. Cornelius answered. Cornelius has got a lot of grace, by the way, here. Cornelius answered, 3 days ago, I was in my house praying at this hour, at 3 in the afternoon. Suddenly a man in shining clothes stood before me and said, Cornelius, God has heard your prayer and remembered your gifts to the poor. Send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He's a guest at the home of Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea. This almost sounds like a song. So I sent for you immediately, and it was good of you to come. Now we are all here in the presence of God to listen to everything the Lord has commanded you to tell us. Cornelius says, look, I've heard of this God. I've heard he's amazing. I've heard he's awesome. Will you tell me about him? Then Peter began to speak. Skipping down. I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but he accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. You know the message God sent to the people of Israel, announcing the good news of peace through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. This is a turning point in the entire history of the world. I told you, this has been 10 years since Jesus was died, crucified, resurrected, and ascended into heaven. For 10 years, to become a follower of Jesus meant that you were probably already Jewish. For 10 years, Christianity had been contained within Judaism. Everybody who comes to Jesus was first born into a Jewish family. And at this moment, Peter's categories get blown out of the water. Peter's mind gets completely, he's like, whoa, wait a second. Other people are getting invited in? Not just people who grew up like me, look like me, believe the same thing. Like, other people can be a part of this? Other people can start to get invited in? Let's keep reading. While Peter was still speaking these words, the Holy Spirit came on all who heard the message. The circumcised believers who had come with Peter were astonished that the gift of the Holy Spirit had been poured out even on Gentiles, for they heard them speaking in tongues and praising God. Then Peter said, surely no one can stand in the way of their being baptized with water. They have received the Holy Spirit just as we have. So he ordered that they be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. Then they asked Peter to stay with them for a few days. This is an amazing story. Everything's going to end well, right? Let's keep going. The apostles and the believers throughout Judea heard that the Gentiles had received the word of God. So when Peter went up to Jerusalem, the circumcised believers criticized him and said, you went into the house of uncircumcised men and ate with them, showing you that no good deed goes unpunished. Why is it hard to be a neighbor? This story tells us two very important things. To be a good neighbor means you're almost always going to have to give up something that was probably important to you, and you're going to get criticized when you do it. That is just the reality of the game. When you start to be a neighbor, you're going to give up something. Peter had to give up an entire category of being like, hey, no. To be a godly person means you act this way, you think this way, you look this way, you do these things. And for Peter, he had to let go of not just something like, oh, I've always not eaten bacon, and now you're telling me to eat bacon, That's not really a loss. That's kind of a gain. But he's like being told, no, like, hey, my entire identity was built on living a certain way. My family lives this way. My community lives this way. My friends live this way. And God, you're telling me all of a sudden I've got to give that up, go talk to somebody who's not only not like me, he's a Roman. And let's not forget, these are the people that are occupying our land and telling us that we have to live according to the way they there's not a lot of love lost between the Romans and the Jewish people during this time, okay? This was not just a simple, oh, hey, you live across the street. This was like, no, you are the antithesis of everything I believe in and want to be. And Peter has to leave all of that behind and step into a home knowing that he's going to get criticized, knowing that people are not going to understand, knowing that people are not going to appreciate what is happening here. But if Peter had not done that, none of us would have been in this room today. Because all of us, unless you grew up in a Messianic Jewish family, did not belong to a Jewish family. All of us would have been considered Gentiles. And Acts chapter 10 shows us what is required. So my question for you is, what are you going to have to give up? What are you going to have to give up to be a good neighbor? Now, there's a couple of things that I think we're going to have to do. Some of these are, some things are specific to you, but there's some things that I think are kind of general and universal. One thing that we have to give up, one hat that I think we've got to take off, okay? Let's see if anybody can recognize this. Let me see my people here. Does anybody know what this is? Somebody said it. Sorting hat. Okay, let me explain this to all the non-Harry Potter people in the room, okay? Because you're like, what's going on here? See, in Harry Potter, you go to this magical school, and one of the first things that happens to you at this magical school is you get placed into a house according to this little magical hat that says, hey, you're a lot like these people. You have the same characteristics and qualities as these people. You should spend the next, 7, 8 years of your life in your school life being around people who have the same characteristics as you. Now, for a kid's book or whatever, sure, that's fine. But here's what happens when we try to live this way. I have an image that I think that you guys should check out, okay? When most of us think about community, this is what we think about when we think about community. All right, now, okay, I'm deliberately picking fun at us. Don't worry if you've got the boots or the hat or whatever. It's all good. Don't worry if you were in a fraternity and you look just like all your bros. That's fine. Here's the deal. Here's why I bring this up. Most of us have no problem saying, well, yeah, I'll extend some community to someone who is 99.9999% just like me. I'll welcome you in. As long as, we would have been sorted together. We would have been exactly the same. And the problem with this is that if this is the image that we have, not the funny one, but if this is what we think of when we think of community, we will never, ever find it. We will never, ever be neighbors because this is impossible to actually find. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says it this way in his book, Life Together. He says, the person who loves their dream of community will destroy community. But the person who loves those around them will create community. If what you have in your mind is this image of, I just need some people that just get me, that just think like me, that look like me, that act like me, and if I can just bring them together around me, then I know the world will be a better place. And here's the deal. If you happen to find somebody like that, sure, by all means, I'm not telling you not be friends with them, but I'm telling you if that is what you're holding on to, you will end up never finding community, and every opportunity you have to be a part of it, you'll destroy it because it doesn't match the image in your head. Let me speak very directly to just us, okay? One of the questions I get asked a lot over the last couple of weeks and months is, how is this merger going to work? And they don't necessarily mean how is this technical thing going to work, or how is this, schedule thing going to work? No, they were like, how is this, two churches becoming one, going to work? And I can't give you all the answers, but I can tell you one way that we can totally destroy it is to hold on to a picture of our mind of what we think it should look like and not just simply love the people around us. If we simply love each other well, it'll work. It's never not worked in the history of the world. Jesus keeps saying, love your neighbor because it works every time. But if we have an idea in our head of 4 years ago we always did this, or 3 years ago when we were at this place it looked like that, and it's got to look like that for it to be real again, we will end up destroying community. I think about there's a book that I love called Living into Community, and the author, a woman named Christine Pohl, says this: the ways we've been formed by the church and culture have not given us the skills or virtues we need to be part of the very communities we long for and try to create. While we might want community, it is often community on our terms with easy entrances and exits, lots of choices and support, and minimal responsibilities. Most of us love the idea of community as long as it costs us nothing. Most of us are like, you know what? I would love to have lots of friends. Just don't ask me to be a friend. I would love to be invited to the party. Just don't actually expect me to say yes or no and just let me show up. I would love to have lots of people who care about me, but don't ask me to return the text. And we keep wanting deep relationships, but we don't want to engage in deep practices that will bring us those relationships. And so one of the first things we have to do is just kind of let go of the sorting hat. There's another hat that I kind of think we have to let go of. Let me see for my literary people if you guys know who this one is. Sherlock Holmes. Okay, yeah. Here's the second hat that we've got to take off and let go of. And it's the hat of knowing all the details and figuring it all out. I got to know everything before I can say yes. I got to know exactly how it's all going to play out. I need to know all the answers before I can ever actually say yes to relationship, yes to being a neighbor, yes to community. I need to know. See, like, Peter shows up and he's like, hey, I've just taken a 3-day journey, and I'm not even sure why I'm here. Okay? Can you tell me why you guys asked for me to come here? I'm not saying you have to be like Peter like that in all areas of your life, but when it comes to community, when it comes to being neighboring, we're so tempted to be like, well, if I go across the street and invite my neighbor to dinner, they might say yes. And if they say yes, they might bring their kids. And if they bring their kids, they might break my vase. And if they break my vase, that's a one-of-a-kind vase. Like, I don't think I can go back to Pottery Barn and get that anymore. I don't think it exists anymore. You know, that was a one-of-one. And if that happens, what if they want to come back for another dinner? I already have enough friends. If I have this other set of friends, that's going to throw off my schedule. What about our kids' soccer practice? Like, what am I going to do about that? Am I going to have to ask my kids not to play soccer anymore? And if they don't get to play soccer anymore, they're not going to make friends themselves. And then they're not going to have relationships. And then we're going to be alone. And you know what? We have such vivid imaginations. And most people are like, I don't have an imagination. I'm like, yes, you do. Tell me all the things you're worried about. And then you'll be like, boom, like you're great at creating all these things. We want to know how it goes before it ever even. And because we're so good at creating all these scenarios, we're like, well, God, I can't give up my entire next 20 years of my life, so I guess I can't invite them over for dinner. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And so we end up saying no to something that God never asked us to do. And if you are this kind of person, I know I'm kind of making fun of it, but if you are this kind of person, because a lot of us are, there's a verse I want you to hold on to. It simply says this: there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. And here's why I want you to hold on to this verse. This verse does not say, one day you won't be afraid, and then you can love others well. The verse says, love drives out fear. For a football fan, think of it like this is the grinding inch by inch, yard by yard. As love advances, fear retreats. The fear stays there until love pushes against it. Love will push out fear, but it won't. The fear will not just disappear. The love takes the spot of the fear. As we love, fear goes away. And so we do it afraid. We do it scared. We do it not knowing how it's all going to turn out. We do it trusting that God is who he says he is and he's going to do what he says he's going to do. But we keep loving anyway. Now, there's something I want us to grasp. There's something I want us to make sure that we truly understand. Because I think for a lot of us, we treat loving our neighbors like kind of like, you're a bonus Christian, aren't you? Like there's normal Christians, there's enormous Jesus followers, and then there's like the Navy SEAL Jesus followers. And it's the Navy SEAL Jesus followers that actually love their neighbors. Like I'm like your B- Christian. I don't need an A. I don't need an A+. I just need my B-. And that's fine. Because we think that this is something extra for the sake of someone else. But there's something I want us to grasp. It's in 1 John 4:8, and it says this: whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Now, here's something that I want to make sure, and this is going to sound a little nerdy Englishy for a second, and that's fine. I don't care. I was an English teacher back in the day, so I can be that way. It does not say God is loving. It says God is love. Now, here's why that, oh, whoa, what does that matter, Jeremy? Okay, the way God exists is as love. There's God, there's Jesus, there's the Holy Spirit. The fundamental nature of their existence is love. They don't exist outside of love. Love is as real to them as gravity is to us. And it is the law of the universe. Okay, that sounds really important, Jeremy, but why do you even say that? What's that mean? Here's what I'm talking about. Let's go back to gravity. Pretend for a second I had some meeting downtown in, I don't know, New York City. I need a city with lots of tall buildings. Okay. I get to this meeting. I go up to the 85th floor, and I realize all of a sudden that my meeting is actually across the street in the other tall building. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm already late. I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm just going to jump, and I'll make it. And pretend that the building's far enough away that like, the Spider-Man couldn't make it, okay? Now, as I jump, what's going to happen? Gravity's going to take effect, and I'm going to break every bone in my body. And the fact that I'm busy doesn't really change the fact that gravity is going to smash me to pieces. It's just simply the law of gravity at work. The law of love is even more powerful and more real than gravity. And we tell ourselves we're so busy, I can't really pay attention to love. I can't really love my neighbors. And then we wonder why we keep smashing our lives over and over and over. Why am I so lonely? Why am I so anxious? Why do I feel so afraid? Why do I feel like I can't ever be good enough? Why? Because we keep ignoring the fundamental nature of reality and expecting it not to have consequences. We don't love others because it makes us the good bonus Christians. We love others because that's the way we were designed and made, and when we fight against it, all it does is damage us. We're not loving each other so that we can get extra gold stars next to our name in heaven. We do this because it's the best thing for us as well. The way God created the universe is that we love. That's how it's always been. That's what it's always going to be. We love others so that not only do they benefit, we benefit. So my question once again is, what are you going to have to leave behind? What is God going to ask you? And I don't expect you to have an answer right this second, but it's worth thinking about. It's worth praying through. It's worth considering. What are you going to have to leave behind? It's just better knowing right now that you're going to leave behind something. God's going to ask you to give up something. And it's going to be okay. Because on the other side, there's something much better. Peter did not know what was at stake in this moment. Peter did not know that when he was going to go see Cornelius, all of human history was about to change. In fact, you can tell by the very common nature of the writing. So we went to Peter's house, but it was like, his name was Simon, but they called him Peter, and he was at a Simon's house who was actually a tanner. And like the details in that story are so mundane. So it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they had to go, and then they had to go back. Because we keep thinking that there's going to be some sort of spectacular moment, but most of life changes in the ordinary everyday now. It's in the, hey, yeah, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, come on over. Yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Because you have no idea what's at stake at 3 in the afternoon. Most days, nothing. Some days, everything. But it's in the everyday, the repeated, the continuous, the next, and the next, and the next. And it's learning to love people that do not like you, that do not look like you, and that you might not have a lot in common in. I've done groups, circles, stuff like that for most of my ministry career. And one of the dumbest things I've ever done is to start putting people in groups based on their life stage. And here's what I mean by that. And if you're in a group right now with a bunch of people on your same life stage, don't worry about it. But here's what I'm talking about. Hey, let's put a bunch of adults with young kids together and see how well that goes. Oh, wait, you guys are all exhausted and tired and no one can meet each other's needs? Who would have thought? Wow, a bunch of 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds are like running you ragged? And then we have a bunch of people in their 70s that are like, hey, I don't feel like this church even knows I exist. And then it's like, wait a second. What if we put them together? What if we took, now here's the deal. I don't care that if you're in a, like I said, once again, don't all of a sudden look at your group or your circle and be like, we got to blow this whole thing up. What I'm saying is, what if we started bringing people into our lives and being present in other people's lives that did not look like us? And what if it wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the best thing to do? What if people 40 years older than me have things that I don't have? And what if people 40 years younger than me have things, I have things they don't? There we go, yeah, I got that. What if people from completely different socioeconomic circumstances can teach me something about the love of God that I'm not going to learn myself? What if my resources could really bless someone else, and what if their resources could bless me? What if this idea of church actually looked different than the divisions of the world? Like, we're coming up to an election day in a couple days, and I know that if I were to ask you, raise your hand on one thing or another, we'd all end up shooting each other in about 20 minutes. But, like, what if the way we loved each other was so powerful that the rest of the world was like, man, I don't know if I get that. I don't know if I understand why, but I want that. I want to be a part of that because you know what? My life's not all that great right now. I got lots of places where it's like lonely and empty and angry, but those people have something different. What if we simply participate in what God initiates? See, we keep thinking that we have to figure all of this out on our own. We keep thinking that, like, hey, I've got to, like, figure out some sort of mapping strategy for my community, and I've got to be able to, like, create every single neighbor, and I got to know all their names, and it's all up to me. But what if you just simply start saying, God, like what Peter did, I'm going to spend time in prayer. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to listen to what God says, and when God brings somebody across my path, I'll follow up. If I feel God like saying, like, hey, Jeremy, go talk to your neighbor next door, I'll go talk to my neighbor next door. Not anticipating that it's going to be anything amazing, not anticipating that it's going to be the next 20 years of my life gone. I'm just going to go and see what God does. What if we just simply participate in what God initiates? Because if God initiates it, who's responsible for it? God. Who's going to sustain it? Who's going to give you the energy to do it? God. We don't have to do all of this ourselves. We simply participate in what God initiates. Cornelius did not know Peter. Peter did not know Cornelius. They were in completely different cities. God brought them together for the benefit of all humanity. God will do the same. He will bring us people in our lives, and He will place us in other people's lives, and we will both walk out the better for it. I want you to know how much is truly at stake here, though, okay? Because, and I wanted to really say something powerful, and then once again I realized, okay, no, there's somebody else who's already said it more powerfully than me anyway. From that same book by Christine Pohl, she says, the best testimony to the truth of the gospel is the quality of our life together. Jesus risked His reputation and the credibility of His story by tying them to how His followers live and care for one another in community. If we could cut through our complacency or despair, we might be shocked at what really is at stake here. The character of our shared life as congregations, communities, and families has the power to draw people to the kingdom or push them away. How we live together is the most persuasive sermon we'll ever get to preach. The beauty of this is that we all get to participate. You might not be able to string together 2 complete sentences. You might not be able to sing, like if you hear me sing, you'll be like, yeah, that's why he speaks. Like, all of us tend to think sometimes that there's this really important skill we need to have. But the most valuable thing that we can do is love each other well. It's the most persuasive thing we can do. And here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. I know when I talk to a lot of people, and I know when I've talked to several of you, you've like, I've never had this, Jeremy. I've never experienced this. No one's ever given that to me. And you're absolutely right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to give to others what you wish someone had given to you. If you did not grow up this way, if this was not normal for you, if all of this sounds like a pipe dream, give it to others and see what happens. Give to others what you wish someone had given to us, and let's watch the world around us change. We know our city needs this. We know our neighborhoods need this. We know our communities need this, but we need it too. And this can be the very thing that will unite us as one church and will change our worlds.